Good evening and welcome to the Q&A for our CAAMFest online screening of And She Could Be Next. I'm Stephen Gong and it's my great pleasure to be moderating the Q&A. First, I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank the co-presenters for helping get the word out for tonight's program. They are the Chinese for Affirmative Action, Bad Feminists Making Films, Brown Girls Doc Mafia, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Bay Area Video Coalition, and API Equality Northern California. Tonight's film is the first episode of a two-part series, which spotlights the story of the movement of women of color who are transforming American politics. The creative team that made this film is composed entirely of women of color. I'd like to introduce the co-directors and one of the subjects of the documentary. Grace Lee is well known to CAAMFest audiences. She directed and produced the Peabody Award-winning American Revolutionary, The Evolution of Grace Lee Boggs. She's been a Sundance Institute Fellow, a 2017 Chicken and Egg Breakthrough Award winner, and is co-founder of the Asian American Documentary Network. But that's bad for me to mess that up. She recently directed and produced 2 episodes of the 5-part PBS series, Asian Americans, which broadcasts and streams nationally this month. Marjan Safinia is an Iranian documentary filmmaker whose films examine identity, community, and social justice. Until 2018, Marjan was the longest serving president of the board of directors of the International Documentary Association. She currently serves on the board of directors of Chicken and Egg. She co-hosts the preeminent online documentary community, The D Word, and is a regular juror, programmer, speaker, and connector of all things documentary. Bushra Amiwala, a Pakistani-American college student from Skokie, Illinois, is the youngest Muslim elected official in the United States, serving on the Skokie School Board of Education. As documented in the film, at age 19, she first ran for local office for a seat on the Cook County Board of Commissioners. In 2020, she will graduate from college and will start what is clearly an auspicious career, becoming an associate at Google. Thank you all for joining us. As we start the conversation, I'd like to invite everyone who's watching to send in questions you have for our guests. I'll start with just a few to get us going. Bushra, I'd like to start with you. Why did you decide to run for office?
Thanks so much for having me today. I'm super excited to be chatting alongside Marjan and Grace. So for me, I was super involved in service work and volunteerism. And for me, it was 5 days of the week. I volunteered at 5 different nonprofit organizations. And I worked on my U.S. Senator's campaign during the 2016 presidential elections, right after my senior year of high school. And the thought of possibly running for and holding public office was something that I never had toyed with or even considered prior to doing so. But it was someone on our then U.S. Senator Mark Kirk's campaign who asked me to run for public office. And hearing the idea that it's something like this is possible for myself, being 18 at the time, that's where the idea came up from. So what really pushed me to do so was the support from my friends and family. So then once I was asked to run, I did a bit of research and decided pretty quickly that it's something I wanted to do, because I know that if I gave it a bit more thought, I probably would have changed my mind. And I always say that ignorance is bliss, because had I truly known what goes into running for public office, I don't think I would have done it.
We're so glad you did. And now that you're serving on the School Board of Education, I need to ask you, how is the reality of public service meeting up with the expectations that you might have had before?
Mm-hmm. I think running for public office takes more time than holding public office, I would argue, specifically for local office. And I think that's what makes local office so appealing and a lot more tangible for young people and for someone like myself. So going into it, I always expected that there would be scrutiny, and being in the public eye, you position yourself to always be critiqued and constantly have up against please others. And I never realized how largely to the extent that that would be. So that's probably one of my biggest things that I wasn't prepared for. And no matter how much you could try to prepare yourself for something like that, I think it's really difficult how often people are saying things or sharing their opinions off of every little notion or nuance. So that's one thing that I don't think I was as ready for. And I think it's something I'd always expected. Like, I knew that it was what I was signing up for, but you don't know what it's like until you're actually in the thick of it.
Wonderful. We'll come back to you, but now I'd like to turn to our co-directors of tonight's film, Grace and Marjan. Could you talk a little bit about how the film came about?
Grace, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, first of all, for having us. We're really excited to be at CAAMFest. So, I think politics is something I've always been interested in, but politicians not so much. Actually, in 2013, I'd worked on another political series documentary about women in politics. And that's where I first met Rashida Tlaib. And she really kind of, for the first time, I actually met somebody who I thought, oh, I want someone like her to represent me. She reminded me of people I knew. She was like the daughter of immigrants, bilingual from the Midwest like me, and just someone who's really rooted in her community. And I remember thinking, I would love someone like her to represent me. I would also love if she ran again for something bigger to, follow that would be really exciting. And then fast forward a few years, and Jyoti Sarda, who's our third producer, she approached me about doing another project and related to women in politics. This is when we thought we might have the first woman president in the United States. That didn't happen. But at the same time, it was always, I'd always really been interested in the local politicians because they're the ones that have the most impact on our own lives. They're the ones that seem more accessible. And so, this idea of doing something about women of color really resonated with me because that's who I kind of have always been making films about. And then this sort of, snowballed into this idea of making a series. And then, we should have, other filmmakers, accomplished documentary filmmakers, also women of color, to help tell the story. And as we know, representation isn't just an issue in politics and industry, but it's also, it trickles down to fields like documentary filmmaking. And that's when I also, called Marge.
Okay, good. Marge, pick it up.
I mean, it was an irresistible offer, right? I remember, it was sometime in 2017, and I think many of us were carrying this incredibly heavy weight about the world that we were living in and what was happening politically and what was happening to ourselves, to our communities, right? I'm from Iran. We were pretty high on the bleep list. And, have been for decades. We're proud to have been on that bleep list for decades. So, it's personal. It's personal to all of us who are part of this project. And it just felt like hope. It felt like something I could do to not feel so defeated and to take back some power about what was happening in our world. And just like the women who we follow, who also got off their couch because enough is enough, and they were going to step forward. I think we took a lot of, we modeled ourselves in many ways on the work that they were doing. So, and then once we got the ball rolling, it just became so fun. It gave us permission to stay fully empowered as women of color, doing our thing. And I feel like both Grace and I have found on this project, we've been fearless and unapologetic in ways that, we feel we can be and we should be for a story like this. So it's really been a thrill to make.
Wonderful. I'd like to ask you how your team and you made the selection of the particular individuals whose races we follow. For one thing I noted, and I wonder where it came into the consciousness of putting the project together, you know, it's not all at a, let's say, House of Representatives or Senate level. In fact, it's, you know, Bushra is a wonderful example of you showing the different levels of what public service entails. And but please tell me about your considerations. You know, geography is one piece, but of course, all of these other aspects of diversity and of experience. And what were you hoping for?
Marge, you want to do?
I mean, I think diversity was super important to us in every aspect of the word. So as you say, levels of experience, levels of office, age, ethnicity, geography across the country. Perhaps most importantly, because we really do see that this is a movement. You know, for every one of these women who we were able to fit into this story, there are hundreds of others. And equally important to the women themselves are the organizers who do the work to make it possible, who are, you know, real unsung heroes and hidden figures of politics that we never get to know and meet. And their work is everything. So for us, from the beginning, it was really clear that this was about a movement. And so then it was putting together the jigsaw pieces that allowed us to show this really as a movement. And then, of course, finding really compelling characters. So, you know, some we knew about, we'd heard about. Bushra was, I mean, Bushra was just such a delight. I mean, on paper, she sounded really, really great. And I remember we set up a Skype with her. And, you know, I mean, it was just such a no-brainer. I mean, Bushra, you know, she reminds me of me. In fact, Bushra, I don't think I've told you this, but there's some shots of your mom in the film where she looks like my mom looked when my mom was your mom's age, you know? And, you know, we just fell in love. We fell in love with her power, her authenticity, her fearlessness. I mean, I don't know if we all caught it, but we should repeat. She was 18 years old when she decided that she'd go for this thing. I mean, that's nuts. You know, think about what you were doing when you were 18. I certainly wasn't thinking about public service in my community, you know, in this way. So, you know, we really picked women who had that ferocity of character, but who also were tied to issues that are the issues that keep me awake at night. And they could help us through their personal stories really talk about what's happening in this country right now.
And same goes for, I'd just like to add, you know, our filmmaking team. You know, we have this incredible team of film directors, you know, whose lives and experiences, you know, and filmmaking prowess closely match, you know, the women that we're following. I know Yoruba Richin and Amber Ferris are watching right now, so hi guys. And you know, it was just really exciting to be able to, you know, create this thing where we're able to, I mean, in a way, it's like working on our own political campaign, trying to put this thing together, convince people why we're telling a political story, an epic American political story, which foregrounds race and gender, which we haven't seen before. So there are so many interesting challenges, but I think, you know, I like to say that, you know, working on this films for so many years has kept me mentally sane when we look at the politics around us. Yeah, sort of, right. Yeah, but it has kept me, you know, optimistic and also inspired because, you know, we see, I just saw on Facebook, Rashida Tlaib is heading to Washington right now in a mask to go vote on more COVID relief, you know? So it's every day. It's every day we have to think about these things. And, you know, it was a pleasure and honor to be able to work on, you know, to follow these women.
Thank you. Oof. I'm going to turn to a few questions that have come in now, and I'd like to start with a question from Amy, and it's also a little bit of a statement. She says, "Your timing is amazing. Stacey Abrams is on the short list for VP, and Veronica Escobar and Rashida Tlaib are in Congress. How do you assess the possibilities and power of women in color in the shadow of COVID?" All three of you can answer, any of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, COVID in a way has been an unveiling of things that have been, you know, thinly hidden for some. And when we see the data about the outsized disproportionate effect on communities of color, you know, Grace can speak about, you know, the hate crimes rising about against Asian Americans. I mean, it's, you know, we don't live on a level playing field society. We don't. And the reason that we need to elect women of color is because women of color, you know, in many ways they get the, you know, I think there's a line in the episode you guys just saw where she says, if we solve for Black women's issues, we solve for everyone's issues, right? We get the worst in education, the worst in healthcare. So I think that's at the heart of the thing, right? Is we need people who have lived experiences of these things to be the ones, or as they say, the people closest to the pain, to be the ones who solve the problem, right? Not a bunch of folks who are out of touch with what's actually happening at the community level. And whether it's COVID or the next thing we have to deal with, it's the same. We need people who know what it's like to walk in those shoes and can legislate to change that reality.
That's wonderful. Well, let me ask Bushra, for your reflections and thought, and when you were conducting your responsibilities and duties, how large is the picture you're looking at? Are you, on what level are you sort of saying, this is my local issue and I've got to focus here? Or are you also saying, I am part of a larger movement and in a sense, everything I do is going to ripple out?
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely I am a part of the movement at large, and it's always really exciting to me when someone approaches me with their own innate interest to run for public office as well, and any guidance or advice that I could give to them. That's my way of sort of giving back to the movement at hand and serving as an endorsement for other people as well. That's where I see that side. But for me, with my current local office, I'm viewing issues at a very hyper local level, yet that doesn't take away from the magnitude of some of the decisions that we're making when it comes to the impact that it has on everyday individuals in my community. And it's really carrying sort of like the balance between the two. It's, knowing that there are only, a few thousand people in my local school district that will be impacted by something, yet that shouldn't take away from the impact that I see for the work that I'm doing. So it definitely is twofold with that. And I think it's such a good way to start as well. I think that it's such a nice way to find a balance between the work that I'm doing with that as one. It being a board position, there are 6 other board members who we have to work with to ensure things get done. And I was always really, board seats always really appealed to me for that reason, because I felt like it was such a good and natural way for me to get my foot into the door politically. And it also makes it so much more practical and tangible to hold public office that is the board seat as well.
Well, I know you have a major issue coming up on how we can restart schools and how schools can be safe. So I wish you the best in this hardest of times that really affects thousands of families in your district alone, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I have another comment for you, Bushra, that just came in, and this is also a lovely one to read. This is from Holden, who asks, I watched the film with my mother, and it was incredible. I cried several times. I am 10, and Bushra is so amazing and inspiring. I want to know if you think a woman of color will ever be president of the United States. Would you run, Bushra? I would vote for you.
I would vote for you.
That is so sweet. Thank you so much for that. I definitely wholeheartedly believe that we will have a woman of color president way before my time comes to possibly run for something like that. And I know it and I believe it. And that's what my hope is for. But thank you. And I hope that you run for something as well, because Lord knows we need young, fresh voices and perspectives in public office.
Oh, absolutely. That is so wonderful. I wanted to return to something, Grace, that you had brought up, you and Marge, and it does seem to me, the parallel between doing movement work in the public sphere in politics, in some ways is not unlike stepping forward into all kinds of structures, right? That have been dominated by men, particularly by white men, and I think you made a kind of reference to just that struggle where you need to be clear and you have a larger goal. You have an immediate goal, which is the film, but a larger goal, which in some ways is to transform a whole field of practice. And I just wonder where you guys are now. And I realize you're, in a sense, still only maybe in one partway along on this journey. So, you know, it's not at the end of the road. But have you learned anything, you know, in the process of making the film that you think you'd like to share about, you know, a larger movement, let's just say?
How long do we have, Stephen?
We have as long
We
as
should pour a drink and continue this
Yeah.
conversation. We've learned a lot. I mean, you know, like I said at the outset, I think we have taken our lead from these women and given ourselves permission to not accept half-baked answers and pushbacks and sort of small-minded ideas. You know, we've been unapologetic. We, on a daily basis, sort of gently help somebody see something that they may have said a bit more clearly. And I think that is the work that we all have to be doing, you know? And I think that in our industry, you know, I think a lot about the power of documentaries to define people, right? So the power of moving image to define people and to define cultures. And, you know, unfortunately in our field, very often when a film is made about people of color from first frame to last, those are not stories of empowerment. And, you know, they're very often stories of victimhood, of people who need saving. And this really does define and kind of, it's a mantle that is really hard to shake off when you are defined by these images about yourselves. So for us, you know, the clarity of on our screen and behind our cameras, this is about a group of women of color saying, we're going to do something differently now, you know? And every time it's gotten hard, because as we all know, documentary filmmaking is, you know, a ridiculous, you know, like a Sisyphean task where you're constantly pushing the boulder up the hill. And having a partner was very, very helpful, because every time it got hard, we just kind of came back to that core principle of, all right, you're going to stand in our way here. We're going to go around you. We're going to find another way to do it, you know? And that really is the lived experiences of all these women whose stories we're telling. So I think it's a movement for representation. I just think that we're at that tipping point, and many, many people in many, many sectors, we're tired of not being at the table, you know? So, so yeah, it's been a profoundly kind of personal changing experience as well, to understand we don't have to be shy about saying what we think. We can just say it. And there's a lot of people who want to hear that, you know?
Bravo. Bravo. If this democracy is to be saved, it will be saved by women. So,
Yes.
so several of the comments have come in, and they want to know the same thing that's on my mind. You know, how can this inspiring film motivate and contribute to making real change? And we're facing that, right, with a general election just a few months away to its conclusion. But we know that's only one stop. That's the next stop on the train, right? But for the film and for the work that you've done in assembling this and telling Bushra's story and the other amazing women in this film, what are your hopes? I know there are several stages. I guess we've got to talk about a national broadcast first, but there's probably some community engagement work. So where shall we start?
Well, first, can I say that what you all saw today was just part one, right? We have a second part, which actually, you know, goes beyond the primary elections, and we follow particularly what happens in Georgia with the voter suppression, which is a huge topic right now. You just mentioned COVID.
Yes.
I mean, how are people going to be voting in this particular election? You know, is it people are, you know, anyway, everybody knows the story. Vote by mail, is that going to happen? And so first of all, I mean, there's a second half to this story, which kind of helps, you know, which will be broadcast on POV, PBS, June 29th and 30th. We have a couple of other festival screenings coming up, which we will announce shortly on our social media. But then we have a whole impact campaign that will take us through to the end of the year, or at least up to the November election. And Marge, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that we believe that a functional democracy is a participatory sport, right? You have to participate in democracy if you want it to work for you, which means I believe at the floor, you got to go vote. Like, that's the basic entry level position, is make sure you vote. but there's so many other ways to be engaged in the decisions that affect our lives. At the hyperlocal level is actually the best place to get engaged. So for example, those of us, Grace and I are based in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, we have a whole system of neighborhood councils. You know, you know, sometimes your eyes glaze over because those meetings can be long and they can be dull, but decisions are made in those long, dull meetings. In fact, it's especially the long, dull meetings where the most lethal decisions are often made, right? So we have to know who represents us. What are their phone numbers? How do I contact them? I should follow them on Facebook. I should sign up for their emails. And then I need to sort of pass this along. Like my excitement for participating in democracy can be contagious to other people. And I need to pass that sort of, since we're talking about viruses, I need to pass, that's a good virus to pass along. So we believe that there's an organizer in all of us. Some people like Bushra from a, you know, young age were sort of like had this clarity of vision that, you know, she wanted to run for office, and that's not for everyone. But every single one of us can participate somehow in helping connect the dots to make sure that we're participating and showing up in this process, because the truth is demographics are very rapidly shifting in this country. We are practically at a tipping point moment where white people will be a minority in this country, and closing that gap between representation and who makes those decisions and what the people look like has to happen for our democracy to really thrive. So our impact campaign is focused around making civics cool. Like, how do we make civics sexy? Because it is really cool to know that you have this power. And how do we lift up the stories of what happens when women of color lead? And to talk about this new American majority. I mean, the new American majority is already here in many, many places. That is what our America looks like. It's not a hostile takeover. It's not a bunch of people who came from, we are Americans, and we are soon the majority of Americans. And so we get to shape the system in our image as it has been shaped by those before us in their image, you know? So that's what we want to do. We want people to be inspired to understand their power.
And just because we're at CAAMFest too, I just want to emphasize, you know, new Americans like Marge, who only became an American 4 years ago, immigrants, you know, this, like, I think you'll see in the series, this power of this new American majority of people of color, immigrants. You know, we have a lot of organizers who are undocumented, who, even though they may not be able to vote, they are still participating because it's still, you know, they see it's the way to affect change in their communities, you know, to find the people who are going to best represent their interests as well.
So thank you. And so let's just, we're going to wrap up, but I want to make sure we do our call to action correctly now. The second part of the film, and in fact, the whole series, will be broadcast in June on the PBS program POV. Is that correct?
Correct. So
Good.
it's June 29th and June 30th, parts 1 and then part 2.
Great.
We'd love folks to who are moved to follow us on social media, because that's the easiest way for us to let you know. So on Facebook, that's And She Could Be Next. On Instagram, it's And She Could Be Next. And on Twitter, it's She Could Be Next, because apparently somebody else had And She Could Be Next. And the faster way is to go to andshecouldbenext.com, where you'll get all the links. We really encourage you to share about this and share your experiences, because it's not usual for us to get to see these stories about ourselves. And we know from the outings we've had how profound it is for people to feel seen, and they feel seen by this project. And I think we all deserve to feel seen. So if you enjoyed it, like, follow us, tweet about it, put something on Facebook about it, and help us grow our army that's going to make our world a better place.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Marjan. Thank you, Bushra. Thank you all for joining us. And please stay tuned, and please join us from our CAAMFest online programs through the rest of this weekend next. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.